Hello, I'm Mason from Vertex Effects, aka the Rig Doctor, and this is what Howard Dumble got wrong. Now, as much as we all love Dumble, Overdrive Specials, and Steel String Singers, and all the great models that Dumble made, there's one thing that I think he got wrong, and I think in retrospect, he would admit that this was something that, although he couldn't have foreseen, definitely would have been something that he should have changed in the design, and that a lot of Dumble amplifier cloners are actually not addressing either. So what did Dumble get wrong? Well, this is what I consider to be the Achilles heel of the Dumble amplifiers, and it is the effects loop. Dumble has a passive effects loop that in every amp that I've seen of his is in every one of the amps. It doesn't have any sort of buffering going on in the effects loop. So even if you just took a 10-foot cable and connected the send to return, it would have an appreciable loss in tone just by way of doing that. And of course, the more capacitance that's seen on the send or the output of the preamp, the worse it's going to sound. Putting pedals in there that don't have high quality buffers, again, are really going to suffer. It is not going to be an ideal situation for people that are using the amount of pedals that most of us do now. It is going to severely impact your sound. Now, for a lot of the Dumble cloners, this is the same predicament. They're trying to make the exact same amplifier that Dumble did, and I appreciate that, and I agree with them. That's what you should be doing if you're trying to make it with as most fidelity as possible. However, the consequence of that is that they too have passive effects loops for the most part amongst all of the clone builders of Dumbles, and so they're going to suffer the same consequences. Now, how did Dumble attempt to address this along with a lot of the other cloners of Dumble amplifiers? They built the Dumblelator. And the Dumblelator is in essence an active effects loop, taking a passive effects loop like what's on all the Dumbles and turning it into an active effects loop, adding buffers, some cases just on the send, and in other cases on the send and in the return, so that you're able to adjust the input levels so that it can go into an instrument level effect or a line level effect, and then having an output gain when it comes back to recover any of that level if you've had to attenuate on the input. This is essentially giving the pedals sort of a hardware firewall so that it controls the impedances properly, gives them a high quality buffered signal so that there isn't any consequence of using the effects loop as there would normally be in a passive effects loop. But is this really Dumble's fault? Was he able to predict the way that people would be using effects pedals as we know them now? I think the answer is no. Back when he started making amplifiers, the need for an effects loop was pretty nullified. There was no need to run your time-based effects in the effects loop. At that time, most people might have been using a tape echo. Those were almost always run right into the front of the amplifier. They weren't really thinking about the need to have digital delays or rack units and things like that, multi-effects used in the effects loop. And when he made the Dumblelator, it was really about trying to address that problem as best as possible. But I don't think that he should be to blame, although the title of this video may imply that that is what we're suggesting. I actually think, in all honesty, that the Dumblelator was his reaction to it, but I don't think that it was something that he foresaw, that there would be people running 15 or 20 pedals in front of their amplifier and then running other effects in the loop. It just wasn't that way when he started building his amps, and he just hasn't really adapted them to include the active effects loops and always have just had it as a separate unit that could live in a rack mount unit. So what about if you own an amplifier that has a passive effects loop, or you own a Dumble, or you own a Dumble clone? How are you going to go about resolving this if you don't have a high quality loop like what would come inside of a Friedman amp or a Mesa Boogie? Well, there's a couple of products that I really like. The first one that I think is my absolute favorite, just because it's small and compact, it can fit behind your amplifier, and really does a great job of addressing the needs of having a buffered effects loop, is the Clinulator. And it's a collaboration with Seriatone that another builder did, and it's really small. It's the size of about an MXR Phase 90. It has all of the controls that you need for the send and return volume, and it also has a recovery control so that you can use that to kind of help balance out any of the loss, and a couple of different bright switches. So that's a really cool one. And there's also other companies companies that make Dumble clones like 2Rock and Bluetone and Seriatone, which make their own versions of a Dumbleator. Some of them are solid state, some of them are tube. I think for transparency purposes, the solid state is definitely the way to go. However, if you want some of that tube coloration, that could be an option for you if you wanted to do it. But how do you actually implement it into your rig if you do have a passive effects loop? Well, I'm going to show you a rig that I've been working on where, for one of my friends that owns a Dumble Overdrive Special, we've been converting his rig so the whole rig will actually go into the effects loop. And I'll show you how you would connect it to one of these external active effects loops that turns your passive loop into an active one, so you don't get any loss, even though you're running a couple of pedals. In this case, it's a volume pedal, a tuner, a delay, and a reverb all through this pedal board and into the loop of his Dumble Overdrive Special. So let's check that out. So now we're going to see how do we actually connect a Dumblelator or a Dumblelator-style effect to a pedal board that has an effects loop designed to go inside of the amplifier between the preamp and the power amp. So what I have here is our Clinulator. Now this is an example of a solid state version of a Dumblelator, and what you can see here is I've already connected it to my amplifier. Now we're pretending today that the Hot Rod DeVille is a Dumble. This doesn't have the exact same type of loop that you'd see in a Dumble, but for all intents and purposes for this will work fine. So I've got my cables connected to the input and output of the Clinulator. Notice I'm using really short cables here because, again, if this is a passive loop, you want to have the least amount of cable going to and from the passive loop into the active loop. The cables that come out of the active loop can be much longer because they are buffered. So I have this snake here, which I'm going to use to actually connect the Clinulator or my Dumblelator to my pedal board, which is designed completely to go into the effects loop. So I'm going to connect send and return here with my snake. And then I'm going to match these up to the send and return on the amp. So I got blue to send and white to return. So we have the send and return connected, which means that now we've been able to take all of the effects that are designed to be in the effects loop of the amp. In this case, it's the Lely volume pedal, the tuner that's connected to the volume pedal, the flashback delay, the Hall of Fame reverb, and the ditto, and that's coming back into the Clinulator, which is breaking in to the effects loop. Now I also have controls here that I can use to adjust the actual effects that are in the loop. So I have a send volume, so that adjusts how hot the input is that's going into the actual pedal board, so I can attenuate that if I have stuff that doesn't run at a line level, or I can increase it if I need to. I also have a return level, so that allows me to make up any gain that I've lost through the pedals, and then I have a recovery stage as well. I also have EQs with the bright, so that I can adjust the EQ of how bright I want it, and I got a couple of different options there. But the main thing that you want to make sure that you're doing with this is you're also testing it by removing the connections to the amplifier, so you have your reference of what it sounds like without the effects loop engaged, and then you bring it back in. So that'll really help you dial with the send, return, recovery, and bright switches, so you make sure that you have as little loss as possible by way of using the actual effects loop. And that's how you would integrate your effects loop pedals in with a passive effects loop using a Clinulator like this, or some sort of Dumblelator or Dumbulator emulating clone that's designed to turn a passive loop into an active one. So that was my analysis of what I consider to be the Achilles heel of the Dumble amplifiers. I love these amps to death. They're amazing, and I would take one in a second if I had the opportunity to get one. But if there's one complaint that I have about them, or one thing that I think they got wrong, it was most certainly the effects loop and not making it an onboard active effects loop that was buffered so that it could handle any of the pedals. But as you've heard, Dumble couldn't have foreseen all this stuff. I don't think in the 70s and 80s he was thinking about what it was going to look like in 10, 20, or 30 years and how people might be utilizing his amplifiers or amplifiers in general. So we really can't blame him for that. And they're great amps, and I don't want to make it seem as though I'm disparaging Dumble because I love what he did. He certainly changed the game for amplifiers just in general, and so I appreciate him for that. But this is just one small piece of analysis, really get nitpicky with them about the things that I think that they could be improved upon. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, if you think that this was a wrong analysis about what he got wrong, or if there's other active effects loop boxes that you think we should be talking about. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about that. And if you like what you saw, I highly recommend that you like and subscribe and ring the bell icon. That's just going to keep you up to date with all the latest and greatest stuff that we're doing here. And until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. I'll see you later.